This video is proudly sponsored by GAMERSGATE. Download games anytime, anywhere. Visit GAMERSGATE.com.
Dear son, I was 12 once for a year. It was a good experience. In hindsight, I'd say I'd do it again if I only had the time. The only downside to being 12 is that it's hard to find decent paying work to support your habits, especially ones that your parents generally don't approve of. Don't get me wrong, my parents didn't totally disapprove of me playing video games. I'm certain they were just trying to curb my habits. At the time, I was downright crazy for video games, not that I'm much different now. But back then, if I so much as heard a MIDI tune or saw a digitally created video screen somewhere, my brain would turn off and I would march in the direction of the ever-elusive video games. If I was piloting a boat in my youth, I would have crashed it into the rocky cliffs if there was an arcade cabinet on the shores. Son, try to think of a time before the internet. You most likely can only do it as well as I can think of a time before indoor plumbing, i.e., you probably can't do it well. But I grew up without the internet being a major part of my life until I was a teenager. Back then, telephones were mounted to the walls, some even had rotary dials. We had televisions without remote controls that only went up to channel 13, we wired our video game consoles to the television using RF switches, we drove cars without automatic door locks or windows. It was madness! Even back in the early 90s, there were still very few ways to preview video games before you bought them. Arcades were still an amazing option, but even then, ported versions of arcade games were rarely as good as the original. Renting games from video stores and borrowing from friends were always your two best options, but if you wanted to buy a game on its release day, your only choice was to look at still pictures of it in magazines, or you flipped the actual game box over and stared intently at the 1-inch thumbnails on the back. Because the magazine was sold through my school's fundraising program, I was lucky enough to have a subscription to Nintendo Power. Thanks to the beautiful screenshots coming over from Japan of Super Mario World and the upcoming The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, my destiny was clear. I needed to buy a Super Nintendo Entertainment System the moment it hit US shores. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System released on August 23rd, 1991 for the retail price of $199.99. I had one whole summer to scrape the money together. Back then, release dates of video games and video game systems weren't as static as they are today. Some stores took a while to stock new video games, especially the older dying chain department stores before Walmart became the juggernaut that it is today. My allowance for filling our furnace with coal and subsequently removing the ashes on a daily basis was $5 every other Friday. That payment only came if I kept the furnace hopper full of coal and the fire running so my dad wouldn't have to take his 4:30 a.m. shower with nothing but freezing water before his hour-and-a-half commute to his incredibly long workday. Based on my memory of the number of times I can count standing in our basement at 0:30, getting yelled at by my father in his underwear about responsibility and a futile attempt to rebuild a fire so he could maybe salvage a decent shower out of the morning, I didn't receive my allowances regularly. I wasn't lazy, just forgetful, I think. By the way, Dad, if you're watching this, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I hope you're looking back at this and laughing at it the same way I am. Probably not, though. Based on my, let's call it, erratic payment schedule, I knew I was going to be able to afford that Super Nintendo with ease by the 5th of November. Seriously, do the math. Even if I remembered to do my chores and not incur the wrath of my father, and I received a steady payment of the $5 the allotted 26 times per year, it would take me 2 years to be able to afford the SNES with 6% Pennsylvania sales tax. I was in a pecuniary pickle, but I was dedicated. I saved all my birthday cash from relatives and every drop of allowance that I could, but my monetary salvation would come in the form of a lot of hard work. Every opportunity that I could, I went to my grandfather to help him with his corn farm. He and our cousins were the closest things we had to neighbors, living about a half a mile away in the valley below our home. We'd work in the fields in the early morning or late in the evening when the temperatures were bearable, and during the day, if my grandfather wasn't making a delivery, we'd work on other projects around the property. But if there were no projects, we were essentially free to play in the woods, catch crayfish in the creek that ran through the property, make tree forts, and stockpile pine cones as ammunition in strategic locations in case of a general rebellion from our sisters would uprise. If you worked, at the end of the day, you'd walk home with anywhere from $2 to $4. You were lucky if you walked home with a $5 bill because my grandfather might not have had change. I'd add my money to my giant plastic baseball bank, and bit by bit, I watched my meager cash supply grow into a wad. I counted it almost daily to make sure no one had found my stash, plus, watching my total dollar amount rise was inspiring, and kept me going back to help my grandfather day after day. Please don't be mistaken. I would have helped him whether or not he paid me because he was an all-around great person and I loved him. He taught me a lot about working with tools and fixing things. He taught me how to drive a tractor. Since we weren't driving on state roads, I was able to drive the van on the property to haul things around. Even now, when I'm in my own garage, or I'm outside working on a project, or when I'm simply planting things in my own garden, my mind always drifts to the time I spent with him. After a long, hot summer of a lot of work and an equal amount of fun, August 23rd finally rolled around. I had enough to pick up the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and with it, Super Mario World. I paid in almost all ones at the local Kmart, and subsequently, I think I gave the cashier repetitive stress disorder in her wrist for counting out over $200. Rushing home that night, I was ready for a full weekend of gaming. Carefully opening the giant box, I delicately placed the console and its controllers in its home below the family room television. I held the controllers in my hand, noticing how wonderfully comfortable they were compared to the NES's sharp, square corners. To this day, they're still my favorite controllers ever made. The cartridge was like something out of a science fiction film. It loaded into the top instead of inserting it through the front door panel. And while some people talk about new car smell, I swear there is such a thing as new SNES cartridge smell. And the game, oh man, let me tell you about the game. In Super Mario World, you control Mario as he travels to Dinosaur Land to free it from the clutches of King Koopa and his 7 wicked children, and once again rescue the Princess Peach. In typical form, Mario can run and jump from platform to platform until he reaches the final goal on the far right-hand side of the level. Mario travels from level to level using an overworld map. Once a level is cleared, a pathway to the next level is opened up. Some levels have special exits, which are found through secret doorways or by using special keys. But it's not necessary to clear every level in order to reach Bowser and save the kingdom. However, in order to obtain a 100% ranking, you need to find every single exit to all the worlds, including the challenge star worlds. Super Mushrooms enable Mario or his brother Luigi to turn into Super Mario and Super Luigi. Fire Flowers grant the ability to throw fireballs, and unique to Super Mario World is the Cape Feather, which turns Mario into Cape Mario, enabling him to fly up into the air and look like an all-around superhero. Stars grant temporary invincibility, and P-balloons inflate the Mario Brothers like balloons and float slowly through the air for a short time. But what most people remember about Super Mario World is the introduction of Yoshi. Yoshis are dinosaurs that eat just about anything they can fit into their mouths, from fruits to turtles to anthropomorphic mushrooms. I can look at the game analytically now and splurge all these factoids out for you so you understand the basics of how the game is played. But when I was 12, it was game on, brain off. I defeated Bowser in one day. With my bank account empty and few other Super Nintendo games available on the market, I felt remorse set in for playing so gluttonously. Thankfully for the challenge rooms and the numerous stage unlocks, I had plenty of reason to keep playing, not to mention I still hadn't gotten the hang of Mario's flight ability. Mastering Super Mario World took me significantly longer than one day, and there was always time spent in-game helping my younger sister and playing with my older brother. For such a short game, it had miles of replayability, due to the fact that it is one of the most perfect video games ever created. The soundtrack is amazing. I still listen to it some days while I work. The cartoonish graphics give the visuals a timeless appeal, and something has to be said about how the game caters and rewards equally well beginners and the most dedicated players. To this day, Super Mario World is still my favorite Super Mario Bros. Game. I feel it is the best paced, creates the most fun challenge, has tons of great secrets, it's appropriate for and appreciated by all ages, and I'm sure it holds a special place in my heart because of what I went through to earn it. The same goes for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System as a console. Later it would be home to some of my other favorites: Super Metroid, the Super Star Wars Trilogy, Street Fighter II, King Arthur's World, Final Fantasy III, which I later learned was actually 6, Mega Man X and X2, Chrono Trigger, Super Castlevania IV, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. I could go on, I really could, but I'm sure you get the idea. One of the best parts about that console, I still play those games on that same console over 20 years later, and they still work perfectly. So what can you take from this aside from the fact that Super Mario World is timeless? The best things in life aren't free, and the very best things in life are earned through hard work and dedication. You exponentially appreciate things more based on how much sweat you put into earning it, whether it's for a hobby, your work, your education, or your relationships. One day when you're big enough, you can have my SNES and all of its games if you want them, but only if you let me play with you. Love, Dad.